Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for a discussion on a topic that is, of course, timely but has been in the news for the last decade. So as we celebrate the decadal anniversary of BRI, I think it's fitting that we sit around a table and discuss what has happened in the last decade, what have been the consequences, how do we look at it, particularly from the vantage point of South Asia. So this discussion is not about everything and anything under the sun on BRI, but largely we'll be focusing on, from our perspective, what has been India's response, what has been some of India's neighbors, their responses vis-a-vis BRI, where we have come in the last decade, what are some of the challenges it faces, and what perhaps are the debates that we are seeing emerging on this topic, both within China as well as outside China, and in particular in South Asia. And to talk about that, we have a very interesting panel, very distinguished panel. We have Ambassador Riva Ganguly Das, who was former Secretary East and our former High Commissioner to Bangladesh. We have Ambassador Vijay Karn, who is joining us. Here he is, Ambassador Karn, who joins us from Nepal. He's former ambassador to Denmark of Nepal, and also at the moment executive chairperson, Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism. We have Dr. Bhagya Senaratne. She's senior lecturer, General Sir John Kotlewala Defence University, Sri Lanka. She's also at the moment postdoctoral fellow at NYU Shanghai. And we have Kalpit here with us, who is our own in-house China person, fellow China Studies. And what we want to look at over the next hour and a half are some of the debates that have shaped the trajectory of BRI and some of the empirical realities on the ground, as I think some of the challenges have become very useful. But when we start this discussion, it's useful to recognize what China put on the table when it, a decade back, put BRI on the table. I think it was a very interesting way of framing or reframing the global economic governance agenda, because no one before that was talking about this vacuum that was there in the global economy when it came to connectivity and infrastructure. So when China launched it, and when China decided to articulate an ambitious geo-economic project like One Belt, One Road initiative, it was seen as a remarkable way of redrawing the geo-economic map of the world, and with that, certainly they have been very successful in terms of energizing a lot of the countries that perhaps were not part of that of the global economic framework till then. They also were able to, I think, in their own ways, articulate an alternative to the Western-led spending and lending that was happening from Western financial institutions. So in some ways, it has become a very interesting framework to understand what China's rise means for the world, and perhaps what are some of the ways in which China will engage with the world. And therefore, BRI is not simply a case study of its own, but it is also a study which I think in its own way exposes us to an understanding of China's rise and what it might look like. So all the challenges that have come, in the context of China as well, today when we talk of BRI, they are also reflective of the way perhaps we are looking at Chinese economic governance model, China's role, China's profile, and how China views norms and rules in the global environment. So some of those very interesting questions we want to tackle. And I will, during this conversation, I would just begin by asking Ambassador Riva Ganguly Das if she can elaborate a bit on, from the very beginning, India was one of the first countries to oppose BRI, or to oppose the way it was being articulated. Of course, there was a sovereignty argument, which India has taken forward since then. But there have also been certain norms and principles on which India opposed it. So when you look at the journey of BRI over the last decade, how do you see India's response to it manifesting itself? Because I think of all the countries, it's fair to say, India has been fairly consistent in its approach to BRI, even till date, when Indian policymakers talk of connectivity, and they talk of connectivity in a certain normative frame. So if you can just elaborate a bit on India's response, and how do you think India has fared in terms of its pushback against China on BRI?
Good evening. Thank you, Professor Pant, for inviting me for this very interesting discussion. of course, we are discussing, you asked me specifically on India's response. Uh, India has been, as you yourself mentioned, has been very consistent in saying that, one is the sovereignty issue of where the China-Pakistan economic corridor passes through. And there are also, the larger question, I mean, for which I need to go back a little to how, and to take a little bit of your points on how China positioned the whole narrative on BRI when it started in 2013. And, it was sold domestically as garnering goodwill abroad. That was an important part of it, that, this would help China get from Project Soft Power and garner goodwill abroad. And this was the global face of China, which was very benign, friendly, and ready to help, warm, cuddly sort of country, which was going to help everybody come up with infrastructure. And as you rightly pointed out, that there was such a huge gap in infrastructure funding from others, I mean, namely the Western sort of bloc, and whatever investments, loans, assistance always came with a lot of strings attached, and judgment on part, judging countries on their own standards of democracy, human rights, etc. So China therefore filled a very important gap in the in the need for development assistance. South Asia in this is particularly important because if you compare the geography of BRI in other countries, in other places, for instance, Southeast Asia has already got fairly well-developed infrastructure. So there was no, dying need for so much infrastructure that South Asia really needed. Then if you look at Central Asia, it's not a big enough market for large investments and for that much returns. Similarly for Africa. So South Asia, in a sense, is really the, most important part of the BRI scheme of things. And in this, I felt that, the BCIM initiative of China, right from the beginning, which really started much before BRI, and which was a track 2 initiative, which came up, with the Kunming. They were in a lot of meetings happening in Kunming, Kolkata, and the whole idea was that there was going to be a connectivity between the Kunming in Yunnan province with Kolkata through Myanmar and Dhaka. So I think the biggest, by India, by withdrawing from BRI, so which meant that this project, this particular part of BRI was dead on arrival, and it was actually dropped from the list of BRI projects right in the beginning. So that was a big setback, I thought, in the whole scheme of things, because the whole idea was to get a connectivity to the Indian Ocean and having an alternative to the Malacca Strait for China, and this was not possible. And we know now how important the whole of Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal, the entire region is. India has always had an development assistance program, but definitely it is much more robust, much more aggressive, and a larger program. I mean, Bangladesh itself gets about, if you calculate, about 9 billion in loans, in soft loans, and if you add the 500 million for defense, it's almost 10. There are lots of projects, more than 40 projects have been completed, though the general narrative is always that, India is very slow in project, because the way we do projects and the way the Chinese do projects is totally different. Ours is totally transparent. There is a very standard tendering process. There is a price discovery process, especially when you're buying hardware. And whereas in the case of China, it's often, if you compare the agreements, there are a lot of hidden elements in the agreements. The interest rate is different for different projects, and also there are projects where one particular company, a public sector or whatever, is actually identified, project is identified. Ours is totally driven by the country which is receiving the loan or investment or whatever. So I think we've also been in the context of Bangladesh particularly, because of the government of Sheikh Hasina, our projects are, especially our connectivity projects have moved at a huge pace, and today we can actually in reality talk of a more connected region. Also, I think in the case of India, we pursue a lot of multilateral group initiatives like the BIMSTEC and the trilateral highway, whereas China's approach is more or less very bilateral. They've realized that in the South Asian context, the best way to work on this is bilaterally. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll come back to you on Bangladesh in particular once we look at specific countries. Kalpit, if I can come to you, and I think it would be interesting to, in some ways, to have a sense of the debate within China about BRI, because we are also looking at the third forum happening soon, and I think there has been the sense that the debate, because of the problems that China is facing domestically, there is a shift in the debate, there is a shift in focus as to where perhaps the projects or how they want to perceive the next stage of BRI. So what kind of debates are we looking at when we look at Chinese domestic constituencies and what they are saying about BRI?
Thank you, Professor Pant. Firstly, let's try and understand where BRI stands in the Chinese, the scheme of things. Now, BRI came in at a time when Xi Jinping was relatively very new in China. He had just become the president, and BRI gets launched within a year or so after he gets the top job. Now, since then, what has been the trajectory of BRI? Trajectory of BRI has been that it enters the Communist Party of China's constitution, and also since then there is also a mention and a lot of mention of BRI in the 14th five-year plan of China. Now, because it is Xi Jinping's pet project for his, in fact, this is the first project of China of Xi Jinping. It is a signature initiative of global power projection, which means that in the Chinese firmament, in the Chinese debate, there cannot be much criticism of it. But yes, there has been a lot of writers writing about how it can be improved. So I think one is the use of BRI in fighting or in combating the American, what writers in China call the American Chinese threat theory. Now, writers in China have said that America is opposed to China's rise, so it is trying to China. I mean, they see it as a peaceful rise, but they say that America is trying to oppose this. They are trying to contain us. So, how about as we go ahead, let's use BRI as some kind of a thing where we show that it is a people-oriented initiative. So. I think going ahead, there will be, we may see a lot of these mega prestige infrastructure projects on the back burner, but instead, you will have smaller projects typically related to digital infrastructure. Like there would be a lot of, there is a lot of emphasis on skill development, so that is there. And also education. So it is trying to kind of whitewash it because BRI took a lot of flack for its debt diplomacy, for its propensity to kind of create political turmoil in many countries. So that is one thing. And of lately, there has been a talk of BRI from a security aspect. So this is also very important because China is an opaque nation, but it also from what they disclose and what they reveal, it also reveals the mindset of China. So typically you have the National Security Commission of China essaying the fact that China faces that China needs to prepare for future storms and that it needs to prepare for worst case scenarios. Now here, when we talk about worst case scenarios, it is never specified as to what this could be. But I think there is a perception of China that the external environment for China may get worse. its trade relationships with the West and with the US may deteriorate. So there is this entire narrative of BRI being the new lifeline, which will help China, tide over this crisis. So yes, the debates in the Chinese academia are encountering the American, using BRI to counter the American threat theory, and also as a lifeline, the whole lifeline narrative of BRIs.
Suggesting that there is some learning going on as well, that the flag that it has received, that there is a churn there, and that perhaps that will be taken on board as you move to the next stage.
Yes. So see, it's been 10 years. So there is see, China is an adaptive state. It learns from its own mistakes. So I think see, the Chinese academia really talks about the fact that there are social costs and environmental costs of BRI, which will damage the brand BRI. So that is something which is also being discussed in Chinese circles, because let's say right around China's periphery, like in Laos, you have large dams being constructed. You have these large infrastructure railway projects. Now this has caused a lot of dislocation, forced relocations, and issues related to not being paid compensation. Now let's look at the case of Indonesia. Indonesia is, I think, in South Asia, it has the highest number of active BRI projects. But in Indonesia, there is a lot of anxiety related to the influx of Chinese labor, and Chinese labor then coming and taking jobs for locals. So Chinese academics look at this as affecting brand BRI. So you've seen a course correction towards more investments into healthcare. You have more investments into telecom, education. So that's how it is.
Go to our external speakers. This is also a moment where Chinese economy is not doing well, relatively well, compared to what it was in the past. So do you see that debate being expressed, that why are we spending so much money out in these projects when some of this can be invested at home, wherein there is there are serious economic issues at stake? Do you see that emerging? Do you see that in the context of BRI, or is it still something that is off the pale in terms of the conversation inside?
So see, again, as I said, it will be a very brave academic who criticizes BRI. But yes, there is a lot of debate about the fact that what is this money, getting us? What is it? What are the tangential gains? So, since and at the time when Chinese economy is not doing well, yes, there would be. I mean, we'll have to see how these things pan out with the whole BRI forum and the kind of debates that go ahead after the BRI forum.
Can I come to you now? Of course, it's been 6 years now since Nepal signed on to BRI. How does it look from Kathmandu when you look at the kind of projects that have been completed? Some of them have not been completed. What is the debate? What is the state of play at the moment in Nepal with regard to Nepalese ambitions, as well as with regard to the relationship with China when it comes to BRI in particular?
Thank you, Professor Pant, for inviting on the issue. It's a very pressing at the global level, at South Asia, and in Nepal also it is much discussed at the moment, the BRI. Nepal, for your information, Nepal has yet not have any project from China under BRI. There is no, actually in the framework agreement, we yet not agree to sign a project framework agreement with the China. So this is a very contentious issue between China and Nepal on BRI projects. In the beginning, Nepal, in the 2017, the backlog of the relation at the time was a little bit strained with India. So our political leaders thought to solve everything from China. So in that case, there was a huge euphoria in Nepal that after the BRI, signing of the BRI, we could manage all rail, airports, many projects. So Nepal has selected 35 projects. So Chinese asked us to reduce the number and we reduced at 16. And then again they asked to reduce and we reduced to 9 at the moment. But the problem that the document was officially yet not released to both parties, India and Nepal both. It is still secret documents. But some of the 2 years back, some of the media houses leaked the documents, and that is why we got it. So in that, there are two very important factors that one is a free trade agreement, another is a project implementation. So the one clause that says that the signing of the project implementation agreement, which is yet not signed, due to difference of conditionalities from China and our position. This time when the Prime Minister Dahal was just 2 weeks back, he was in, not 2 weeks, 10 days back, he was in Beijing. So at the time, negotiation on project implementation agreement not finalized. So that is why if you see the joint communique, it says that very soon we will be finalized. But for my understanding, there are some important differences on the first is the Nepal has no history of taking commercial loan for any infrastructure project. So we have never taken commercial loan from any countries. The first thing is that the BRI, everything is a commercial loan. And our condition, we asked Chinese that we can only take soft loan and then the condition at par with the multilateral financial institution like World Bank and ADB. The conditions are very different of that one. As per my understanding, Chinese proposed us around 4% of the interest and then 10 to 15 years, which is not suitable for Nepal. Among 9 projects, 2 have been already removed from the BRI. Nepal has been, for 2 projects, I remember Phukot Karnali hydroelectricity project, which has been already signed with the Chinese, India state company, NHPC, something like that. And the second one is a Tamor, which is the eastern part of Nepal, hydroelectricity, which is also being processed to signing with the Indian company. So that is the position at the moment is that the euphoria has been already settled, and 2017 election, the major point for electioneering by the Communist Party of Nepal was the BRI and the infrastructure project and many things. But now everything is settled and there is understanding in almost all political parties, including Communist parties and Nepali Congress, that Nepal cannot take commercial loan and we cannot go for a Chinese management. As per the law of the Nepal, if we take the loan, we cannot hand it over the project to any countries. That must be an international tender, which Chinese not agreed on. So these are the major differences where the Chinese and Nepal differ. So for me, as per my understanding of 6-7 time negotiation in 2022, when Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister visited, then there is a visit by the Speaker of the Chinese People's Congress. And all the visit, we have the same conditions and the Chinese not agreed on it. So that's why at the moment, I don't think that the BRI is going to be implemented in Nepal in near future.
Can I now come to Dr. Senaratne? Sri Lanka has had a very interesting experience with BRI. We have seen some of the debates in Sri Lanka shaped around the Chinese involvement in the Sri Lankan economy when the crisis hit Sri Lanka, economic crisis hit Sri Lanka. And we have seen some of those debates becoming almost being shown as an example for other countries. That because you have had this problem in Sri Lanka, this can also happen to you, kind of an argument that has been made. So, so when you look at it from Sri Lanka's perspective, of course, China has been an important economic partner. But post the economic crisis, how do you see China's role? How do you see Chinese BRI projects now being envisioned? And is there a change of mood now in Colombo with regard to the kind of projects you want to, or Sri Lanka wants to pursue with China?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Right now, I think post-financial crisis from last year, our immediate concern is to try to renegotiate the bilateral loans with China. And there's been a lot of hesitancy from the Chinese end towards restructuring the bilateral loans. And I'm sure if you look at what's happening in Sri Lanka, the IMF is going to review their recent financial commitments to our country, and there's been they've stalled negotiations, and the review process would upend itself because the Chinese have not agreed to actually properly restructure the loans. So I think this is one of the major concerns we have right now in Colombo, and citizens are actually worried as to how China would go about doing this, and how even our diplomats and our politicians would kind of deal with this situation. I think something interesting to watch for us is the Sri Lankan president's visit to China later this month, whether he would be able to speak to Chinese president and come up with some grounds for negotiation, to see if they'll, come to some agreement on bilateral restructuring of debt. With regard to BRI, I think there's a mixed bag of opinions. The people who are aware of the Belt and Road Initiative and who are aware of, what's going on, have an opinion that whilst there's been some progress and whilst there's been infrastructure development that comes through the Belt and Road Initiative, it hasn't necessarily been lucrative for us, or that the politicians have kind of used it for their own benefits. And I think based on what Ambassador Karna is saying, it's a very different story for us in Sri Lanka, because we have been a member of the Belt and Road Initiative from 2013. We've made use of the infrastructure development and the loans that have come through, and we've had at least 20 projects that have come benefited from not just the roads that you see or the ports, but there are lesser known projects like on sanitation, and there's also been a reservoir. So there's been a multitude of projects that have benefited from it. But I think if you talk about opinions, there's been a mixed, there's a lot of mixed opinion about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Ambassador Ganguly Das, if you can also talk a bit about Bangladesh, because of course we have heard about Nepal and Sri Lanka, and you briefly mentioned in your initial remarks about the way India has approached the issue of development partnership with Bangladesh. But given your experience in Bangladesh and how Bangladesh has a very special relationship also with China, and China has been an important partner in many respects. But when it comes to BRI, what have you seen on the ground in terms of real outcomes insofar as Bangladesh is concerned? And is that debate contingent on the political complexion of the government, or is it something that that is mostly consensus based within the political system?
I think, Bangladesh joined BRI in 2016. Xi Jinping's visit was a very big visit, and a huge number of announcements were made, and mainly the big package was that of 40 billion investment, 24 billion in assistance, and 20 billion in loan agreements. This is the BRI component was about 20 billion in. So after all this while, what we have seen is, projects having been signed for about a little above 9 billion US dollars. And actual disbursement after, from what I know, before COVID was only about 1.5 billion. It may have been a little more since then. So in terms of, what was announced and what is actually taken off the ground, there is a huge gap. The main projects which are going on is the Karnafuli underground tunnel, which I think is a very prestigious project, because this is going to be the first underwater road in this region. So that's a very prestigious project. And then there is, the train link on the Padma Bridge. Now, the Padma Bridge was inaugurated recently, and the Padma Bridge road is actually an entirely Bangladesh project with their own money. You would recall that it was earlier a World Bank project, and then World Bank has raised a lot of issues, and Bangladeshi said that, we will do it on our own. So they, in fact, once the bridge was inaugurated, Bangladesh government had to issue clarification saying that this is not a BRI project, and please don't claim it as a BRI project. The BRI part is the rail link, which is still under construction. So Karnafuli has, as far as I know, not yet been inaugurated. There is the Padma Bridge. There is a IT project which I think has been done, which is a government IT project, which is this is the second phase of the project, and I believe the third phase is also under BRI. And then there are a couple of other roads and a sewage treatment plant, etc. So if you really look at what was announced, if you compare what was announced with what has actually been achieved on the ground, there is a huge gap. And then if you compare it with actual disbursement, there is again a big gap. Now, it's very interesting that the Bangladeshi finance minister, about maybe last year, he gave an interview to a British newspaper where he actually said that, you should think twice before taking loans from China. And most projects are not, the due diligence in projects is not done. And he actually advised least developed countries and developing countries that you should do due diligence before you take a loan. And this, coming from the Bangladeshi finance minister, I think was a very significant statement that so if you see what is happening now, that, as Bhagya just mentioned from Sri Lanka, that in many projects, there is no transparency, which all of us know, that there is no transparency in the loan component. Then once the project takes off, even at that stage, there is a lot of negotiation on repayment. And if you read on BRI, you'll see that China is disbursing more money on restructuring debt rather than on new projects right now post-COVID, because BRI is going through such a difficult period. So the situation is that, and Bangladesh is in a very big advantageous position, because it gets a lot of assistance because of its excellent track record on debt servicing. It gets a lot of assistance especially in infrastructure projects from ADB and also from Japan. And even though Sonadia, the big deep water port project was under BRI, did not take off. They now are going to have a deep water project as soon as 2027, which is the Matabari port, which is the Japanese funded project. And it's a very ambitious project, which is linked to the Japanese Big B project, which is an industrialization project covering West Bengal, Northeast Bangladesh. And so there are very exciting things happening other than the BRI in Bangladesh. But definitely, Chinese companies there are a lot of Chinese companies, there are a lot of investment by China in media. You take any sector, there is a lot of investment. So, time will tell what, there's an election coming up with the new government, how things will proceed. But looks like, it's not, I don't see much development over the 14 billion which was promised, and the because no new projects have been in sight for a while now.
We can't have this discussion without actually talking about CPEC. There have been reports about even, CPEC used to be this centerpiece of BRI in at least in South Asia. In fact, it started off from there in some ways. And it started off with the Big Bang. There was a lot of ambition around it. But we have seen it all coming to a standstill at the moment. At least we hear these reports. What is the assessment as of now on the CPEC and various projects that it entailed? And is this contingent on primarily what is happening within Pakistan, or is this about Chinese problems as well, partly, which is responsible for the present predicament?
Yeah, I think it's very important to analyze the aims. When we talk about CPEC, we basically talk about two parties, China and Pakistan. Now, the Chinese conceptualization of CPEC was that it would be, it would link its restive, the western region, the Xinjiang region, to a port like Gwadar, and improve the, basically, link that region through trade, and that would also have a certain security ramifications for China. Now, Pakistan saw this as, and India, China is investing in Pakistan, so let's try and monetize our so-called strategic location. Now, if you closely see the the trajectory of these projects, so between 2015 to 2020, you had a lot of investments into energy, typically highways, that is, refurbishment of existing highways and constructions of some new ones. Post, then there was a, COVID hiatus, and since then there has been a lot of talk about the second phase of CPEC, is the whole construction of industries and SEZs. Now, see, the debate in Chinese media regarding CPEC has basically on three very important prongs. Now, one is that, like you said, this is not like a pork barrel investment where China keeps putting in money. So also, how do you monetize that, and how do you get returns? So we've seen we've seen in Pakistan, you have strained relations between between different political parties. You have this entire friction between the military and the civilian establishment. So that is a big dilemma for Chinese academics when they look at CPEC and its potential. So that they see as one of the determining factors. Now, also along with that, there is this entire issue of economic security, because China's engagement in CPEC has also created a lot of backlash against Chinese infrastructure and Chinese people. So how do you, there is a question of how do you kind of ensure security of your personnel who are in this of Chinese personnel who are in this country. So when Shahbaz Sharif went to when Shahbaz Sharif went to Beijing in November 2020, this figured prominently in his talks with Xi Jinping. Now, China has been asking Pakistan whether they can have private security companies operating there, but that also has a certain ramifications regarding Pakistan's sovereignty. So that is a lot of academics see CPEC as being incumbent on two things. One is the political stability and state capacity, and the last is about economic security of CPEC.
Ambassador Khan, if I can come to you, where you laid out in Nepalese position quite categorically. Now, how do you see any possibility of a change, given that as we were discussing earlier, that the Chinese are also adapting, and they are also becoming more sensitive to the challenges that CPEC projects have faced. The BRI projects have faced, and perhaps as we look at the new as the coming forum on BRI, we will see some modifications in Chinese approach to BRI. So when it comes to Nepal, will it be primarily driven by the Nepalese factors, as you had outlined in your argument earlier, that look, Nepal doesn't take commercial loans, Nepal is not interested in the kind of in the way Chinese are approaching this, therefore there will be a distance between the two, and therefore across political spectrum there is no uptake of China's engagement in Nepal. But if China say as China improves and adapts and evolves with its projects, do you see the possibility of Nepalese policymakers re-engaging with this subject, or changing the terms of this engagement with China? Or is it something that as you claimed earlier, is largely settled debate in Nepal at the moment?
Look, yesterday Prime Minister Dahal spoke on BRI. Very clearly he spoke. The program was organized by the Chinese embassy to celebrate 10 years of BRI. So where the Prime Minister very clearly said he is not comfortable with the funding modalities of the BRI. This is first time any Nepalese Prime Minister vocally spoke on this subject. Although the Prime Minister, earlier Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba, when he met with Wang Yi in 2022 March, at the backdrop of MCC ratification, where the Chinese try to convince Nepal not to ratify the MCC project funded by the USA. It was a $500 million US grants to Nepal for infrastructure project, a road, and another is a transmission line. In that case, Nepal has very clearly, Prime Minister Deuba told in a very emotional way, he explained that 70s when you were the poor and Nepal was also a poor country. Now you are the superpower in economy and we are still poor. So why you are asking us to take loan? This is the right time you to give us grants. So controversy here is that the Chinese is ready for the loan at the commercial loan. However, Nepal wants grants. This is the one very important issues where Nepalese community after Sri Lanka, Hambantota and the financial crisis in Sri Lanka, it has a big shock to the Nepalese political leaders. Earlier, before Sri Lanka, everybody was talking about BRI. BRI will do this. Every leaders, each and every Communist Party leaders has spoken almost, but now in 1.5 years, I couldn't see anybody to speak on BRI. Even we organized a program in 22 and 23, even the other leaders, political leaders, former foreign minister, present finance minister, they said that we are ready for the grants, not for the loan. So one very important thing that this one. Another issue is a free trade agreement, which is a very contentious in Nepal again. Chinese studied in Nepal, trade between Nepal and China sent to us that if the free trade agreement with the China, Nepal's GDP will be increased by 4.2%. So our trade ministry has done another research, and we found that it is reduced the GDP by 0.24%. So, and then Chinese asked us to sign BRI, free trade agreement, and Nepal said, no, we can't sign it. So agreement was that there should be a joint research team to study on the free trade agreement between Nepal and China, and then we will sign. But now can you imagine? We import 200 billion Nepali rupees product from China. However, we export 1 billion Nepali rupees to China. So it's a huge gap, imbalance. So there is very less chance. Recently, in just 2 months back, there is one Politburo member, I forget his name, he was here. So he brought a new policy here, Silk Roadster. And that is nothing to do infrastructure. It is clearly a soft power program, software, health, school, also school smiley children's program, distributing cycle, doing some civil society work and something like the Americans earlier doing as NGOs or Western countries do. So what I found that the Nepalese intellectuals, even political parties, and personally when we talk to the political leaders of different political parties, they are worried of the debt trap. Nepal at the moment is a no more problem of the debt. We have only 21% of the international loan, the whole hour. So we have a more domestic loan than the international loan. So we have no problem. But Sri Lanka case has been taken by the Nepalese people, political leaders, as a very shocking. So that's why now I don't find that the Chinese yet not ready. Just 2 weeks back, we have a negotiation in Kathmandu. We have a negotiation in Hong Kong. We have a negotiation in New York even. And then we have a negotiation in Beijing with the president and then the prime minister. So Chinese not agreed on the terms and conditions what we forwarded, and we couldn't agree on that one. Just imagine that the joint communique, they started discussing by 4 in the afternoon and release at the morning by 4 only. That was the reason that so I don't think that there is any chances the Chinese coming to changing their policies on BRI. This is because of China has a problem. If the China has special provision for Nepal, it may reflect to other countries, the demand from Bangladesh, demand from Sri Lanka and other African countries, even Southeast Asian countries. So I don't think that the China agreed to the terms and conditions of Nepal. Nepal asked for the loan at the par of the World Bank, which is around 0.7 or 6%. ADB, we took 1.2%. And then the question also that we have to change our law. If there is a complete loan, our process says that you have to go to international bidding. And if this is allowed to China, then we have to allow Japan, we have to allow India, which is another major financer for us. And then we have for Kuwait, we have what's called it's a Saudi fund also. And then there are a lot of countries which is funding Nepal. So it needs another type of political consensus among the political forces. And I don't think that over the loan there should be any consensus on these issues. And then question arises that if the World Bank is ready to finance for below 0.1%, then why should we go for China for the infrastructure project? That is the question raised by our former finance minister and by the other Nepali Congress leader also. So in near future, there is a very least chance on that. Thank you.
This for a broader conversation and interventions by members of the audience. Bhagya, if I can come to you for concluding this round. Now, as we heard from Ambassador Karna also that there is of course, we were talking about China learning from its past mistakes. We are also looking at nations learning from each other's experience and therefore evolving their policy responses. He talked about how Nepalese policymakers have looked carefully at what happened in Sri Lanka and therefore they are imbibing some of those lessons. Now, in terms of those lessons, when you look at it from Sri Lanka's perspective, have you been able to better, or is there any sort of evidence to suggest that Sri Lanka post-financial crisis has been able to better navigate or get better deals, say, from other nations? So look, that there has been a crisis. We have now gone to, we have shown that the Chinese have not really been very helpful. Of course, if they decline restructuring in your case, because they also are afraid that this will set a precedent for other countries as well. So have you been able to therefore navigate your relations with other nations, with other lenders, where you have been able to make a case that look, this is a good opportunity in terms of reshaping the contours of global lending arrangements and infrastructure and connectivity projects? Do you see that evidence in Sri Lankan policy making, and is that something that you think is sustainable? At the moment, of course, you are reeling under a crisis and you're trying to come out of that. But do you see that on a sustainable basis in Sri Lankan economy, among Sri Lankan policy makers? Is that something that is an important trajectory of policy making that you foresee within your country?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Unfortunately, I don't see that kind of engagement or initiative in Sri Lanka, at least right now. And listening to the other speakers talking about Sri Lanka and, especially Nepal, taking Sri Lanka as an example, I kind of felt embarrassed that we are not learning our lessons and
I'm
it
not
seems like
impressing you, please. It is not for the impressing you, but the lesson for a
and as
political
a
leaders.
citizen. But at least the other countries are taking a leaf out of Sri Lanka's experience and learning something. And I honestly wish that our politicians were able to say the same thing and would do that. But I think with regard to debt restructuring, I think the biggest other, bilateral lending. If you take bilateral lending, the other biggest loan lender was India, and I'm sure you're aware that India has come forward and done their needful. So in this sense, I think balancing these two countries, Sri Lanka has been successful there. But I think the contention with China is that they do not want to get involved with this IMF negotiations and instead want to have this bilateral understanding. I think a previous speaker mentioned this, that instead of going for multilateral discussions, they want to have bilateral kind of engagements with countries. I think there was also discussion about an FTA. So this is something we see even in the Sri Lankan context. There's been a lot of pressure for Sri Lanka to sign the FTA with China. So I think for us, should Sri Lanka kind of show an interest in these kind of scenarios where we suggest, we indicate that we are interested in an FTA with China or other indications, then I have a feeling that China would be more inclined to renegotiate and restructure bilateral lending with Sri Lanka. And the bigger story, I think you also mentioned earlier about whether this is setting an example. Whilst other countries are learning, I'm unsure as to whether China would take the Sri Lankan case as an example, because we know there's been previous cases like in Zambia and Suriname and even Ecuador last year, there's been renegotiations of bilateral lending. So Sri Lanka is not just a case, but it's one of a few. So I think the bigger concern for China is whether this would play out in other countries, and whether restructuring would be the norm then. We also have to understand that in Sri Lanka, bilateral lending from China is not the only concern. We have a bigger concern in terms of multilateral lending from the World Bank and even IMF that's coming. ADB. So these are also pressing issues that we have to look at, and it's not necessarily only bilateral lending that we have to look at. If I would ask you to go and look at the Department of External Resources, they have put up visuals on the kind of lending we have got, and you will see that market lending and even domestic lending for that matter do play a larger part compared to that of China. So what's the way forward? I'm really unsure, because locally there's been a bit of corruption, and also I think that's one of the bigger concerns. That's one of the concerns the IMF has drawn Sri Lanka's attention to. And we also see that politicians here aren't very vocal as we see from the Nepali experience. They haven't really said anything, and I'm really sad to say that in Parliament we don't hear any constructive discussions around this. It's as if there's this saying in Sri Lanka that Sri Lankans tend to forget things 2 weeks later. So I think that has really come into play. We seem to have forgotten, at least our politicians have conveniently forgotten everything related to the difficulties Sri Lankans faced last year. And I mean, they're going about as if there's no problem in the country. So I think something, quoting the president from a speech last week, he has said things will get more difficult, but there is hope for Sri Lanka's recovery, economic recovery next year. But again, these are just words. We are yet to see concrete action coming into place to see how Sri Lanka will actually recover without any action.
And I hope the recovery is fast and recovery is sustainable, because I think this is for all countries in South Asia. That is important, given how well Sri Lanka was doing before the financial crisis. It's certainly a tragedy to see the downfall. But I'll let this conversation now, let this be open. Please feel free to ask questions, intervene, interject. So I have two hands here, and I can't see at the back. There are people at the back. But yes, I have. Sir, we can start from you. Please introduce yourselves and
Yes.
also direct the question to
Yes,
to
Rajneesh Vadera. I am a visiting faculty at Jindal Global Law School. I specialize in environment, climate, coal, power laws, and policy. I want to just, mention this, that to my mind, the BRI was coming of age, was China's coming of age on the international scene. They wanted to extend their influence. And it was a very nice way because the scheme seems to have been well designed, at least internally. The public sector companies needed business. They were hungry. China's infrastructure was already built. So they could go out in the area of China's influence. China would fund it. Business would come. Also, prison labor was being used that nobody mentioned. I don't know if that's the norm, but it's been coming out from Pakistan. So I don't know if every country is using Chinese prison labor, but it seems to be a nice way for somehow getting some commercial benefit out of those prisoners that China already has. So I want to ask you this. If this was China's way of coming of age, and if India is now trying to come of age, perhaps India is rising, and one day we'll probably match or try to do something similar. Do you think, what would you think? What would you like, what would you envision India's program of a similar nature to reach out? We hear of Vishwa Guru, we hear of Akhand Bharat, for example. The scheme came up and then suddenly, like it was watered down a little bit. It seems to have been perhaps not properly received in its first phase. But we are seeing some beginnings over there. We are seeing some beginnings of India's interest, at least in opening cultural doors to the Central Asian republics, the Central European republics, the Far East. What would you, Ambassador, directing it to you, what in your vision should be India's path?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Shivam, and I am currently preparing for Indian Civil Services. Thank you for organizing this beautiful talk, sir. My question, if you permit, was directed towards Bhagya ma'am. You mentioned a very interesting line in your talk that there was a mixed opinion in Sri Lanka about BRI, and you mentioned that politicians used it for their own benefits. So can you please elaborate on that factor? What were those particular benefits, and did this factor played a big role in different other countries also taking up BRI very proactively despite seeing potential red flags in it? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Samidha Jain, a first-year student from Delhi University. My question is directed towards Ambassador Das. Ma'am, we have spoken about CPEC and BRI, but we haven't really spoken about the Digital Silk Corridor, which more than just 17 BRI countries, but 138 countries are part of it. Now, I feel that Digital Silk Road is more of an issue than BRI because it's very rapid and it comes under Made in China 2025 policy. How do you think it is going to impact India's foreign policy and how dangerous it is for India?
Well, this is a very big question, how can India do anything like the BRI? My personal feeling is that India should not and will not, because our strengths are very different. We should leverage what are our strengths, and our strengths are very different. Our strength is our vibrant democracy, our free economy. It's a market economy. We've got rule of law. We don't have to take this path. As Mankikar mentioned that, when 2013 Xi Jinping had just taken power, this was his big vision, the big foreign policy objective. And what was China doing? China was shedding its surplus production capacities as well as all the money that they had. So we are in a very different position. We don't, we don't even spend a fraction of the money that they spend on soft power, for instance. And I've been a diplomat, and I've had a Chinese come and ask me that, we spend so much money, yet nobody likes us. You guys spend nothing, and everybody talks about Bollywood, this, that, and the other. So, governments actually don't produce soft power. Soft power is there to leverage it. A government cannot get into the business of producing soft power. You leverage what you have. So Bollywood gives us so much soft power, but we don't produce it. We've got nothing to do with it. People talk about India because of the our fabrics, fashion. It's all in the public sector. It's in the non-governmental sector. It's in the business sector. So that's really our strength. So I don't think we will be going anywhere in that direction. Our development assistance program is very different, and here a very large concentration is on capacity building. And here, because our education, a lot of what we do is in English language, so people from other countries who come, they benefit from the kind of capacity building effort we do. And we don't only do education. We do a program for middle management in governments and in public sector, which is extremely popular and which really helps us leverage our position in that sense. We've got friends, in other countries in all sectors. Digital Silk Route, of course, it's we all know that both through hardware as well as software, there is a concern about Chinese, penetration in the digital field. And I mean, because there was no chance to discuss everything, Bangladesh itself is going in for digital with China in a big way. What, in fact, the way I feel BRI is going to go and where China has a huge advantage is green BRI, which is being talked about, because as countries struggle to meet their Paris Agreement targets as well as their net zero, etc., what are the easiest thing, the low hanging fruit is energy transition. In energy transition to electric vehicles is the easiest to do, and who has the advantage there? So it's not there's going to be a shift from big infrastructure projects to digital as well as to green technologies and green BRI, which is a term which is being used now, because the environmentally harmful, unsustainable projects are going to be shed, I think, over a period of time.
That part is clear, but what about India in this? What about India? Because this is something which you can't stop. BRI, though there are some effective counterbalances towards it, but digital Silk Route, this is something which is unstoppable and unfathomable. So how do we counter it, and how dangerous it is for us?
A lot of steps, but I think we've got enough legislation and internal checks and balances to take care of what we do in the digital, because we've got the capacity to do it. We've got both the the soft capacity as well as, I mean, we are dependent on the hardware sometimes, but you've seen the kind of restrictions which have been put on Chinese goods from coming in. And all our digital platforms are our own. We have a digital data protection also. So I think we are, of course, digital is a new field. All countries learn as they move. It's not as if somebody has got the template ready and you can just borrow, copy, and in every country is different. So the dangers are there, but I think we are not in a very bad place.
Over to you.
So 2 questions about the mixed views on the BRI. So here I think I can broadly categorize Sri Lankan society into 2 groups: those that are aware of what is happening and regularly update themselves on news, and the segment of society that really don't follow what is happening and wouldn't be aware of something called the Belt and Road Initiative because they have other things to focus on, everyday life kind of thing. So if you look at the broader segment that are aware of it, they do understand that there are benefits that come out of it, but they also question, do we have to kind of spend so much to reap this benefit? Okay. We also have people questioning the government's role in it, like for example, corruption. I myself have done that. We see, for example, Karnataka Highway, Colombo-Karnataka Highway is about 24 kilometers, but we see billions used on it. I think from what I recall, it was about 2.5 billion for that small segment in four stages, right? So that's a lot of money going in for a very, very small stretch of highway. So we question, like, to what level are we talking of corruption? Is it not just the top tier, but are we looking at like provincial level corruption? So again, you see the kind of questions that come in, the kind of views are very diverse if you look at Sri Lankan society. And just an ordinary person on the road would also not understand the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, but would possibly perhaps even look at in all of this as Chinese lending. So they wouldn't understand bilateral versus BRI lending. Everything would be just Chinese loans, right? We also have this debate in Sri Lanka about why everything has to come from China. Why are the other countries, or why are Sri Lankan politicians somewhat rejecting better projects coming from other countries? A good fine example is the LRT project from Japan, JICA project that was shot down. But we don't see anything coming up that is either equivalent to or even better, right? We have some of the infrastructure ready for the LRT, but it's just like disappeared, right? So that's what I was talking about, the mixed views. It's a broad brush when you look at Sri Lankans talking about the BRI. The politicians and their benefit. So here what we need to understand is they have benefited, like I said, the cost factor. There's not been, I think someone was talking about due diligence. I myself question whether there's been due diligence when we go about doing these projects. For example, Hambantota, I know it's spoken about a lot. But when we talk about it, it's a project that's been earmarked some 20, like from the 80s, right? From J.R. Javardhana's time, though it's not understood as being so. But the timing and the amount spent and the way in which it was sort of implemented raises a lot of questions, right? For example, I think there was an incident with the breakwater. There was a massive rock in the middle. So my simplistic question is, did you not see a massive rock when you were doing all of this? Like, how did that evade like your surveys? So like, I don't know anything about building a port, but as a layperson, I would think you would survey that area, like the sea, to see if there's anything, you know, that would help you build a port, or, you know, would disrupt this process. So I'm curious in terms of politicians benefiting, the amount of money that goes in for projects, and also like the ways it happens. Even with the port city, you see the previous government coming in, they stopped it, but all of a sudden there are these negotiations, 1.5 years, they're fine with it. But to our naked eye, nothing has changed. There are environmental concerns, right? Even now we see, I mean, people talk about how important it is, financial sector will come in, but post-COVID, we are wondering who exactly is going to invest in the said port city, because we know, like, we are conversing online, a lot of things have gone, are now virtual, that you don't need to have physical structures at a port city to function. So there's been a lot of, I think, politicians benefiting from it. And I think also the way the Chinese, like I said, there's a lot of bilateral discussions. So I think this paves the way for the Chinese to kind of go in and assist and, you know, have these conversations behind closed doors that people don't understand. Another interesting thing, just to give you an idea of what happens, I think last year, there was these Chinese donations to a political party, the SJP. And I think people were wondering, why is it that a secondary party is getting these kind of donations from the Chinese embassy, and for what purpose? Why is it that the government of Sri Lanka is not getting these giant, donations from China if it's for the people, but like random political parties or select political parties that are getting it? So this is why I'm saying politicians are benefiting it, but I think it will be somewhat difficult to identify the kind of money or the ways they are being compensated for.
Thank you, panelists, for the wonderful question. I'm Dr. Shriparna Pathak, Associate Professor of China Studies at OP Jindal Global University. My question is to Ambassador Vijayakant Karna. Sir, you said as to how, there's this framework agreement which has been signed on the BRI between Nepal and China, but it's not yet out in the public domain. The media leaked it to the public and, it's available in bits and pieces. My question is twofold. First is, what is the rationale for not making it public? And B, if there is something that needs to be hidden, why did Nepal sign on to it in the past? Because as you mentioned, Nepal is not okay with the 4% interest. Nepal wants it as a soft loan. It's not taken any commercial loans. So Nepal has put up a strong fight against, all these conditionalities which the BRI can bring in. But then why sign something which can't be made public?
I'm Amlan Datta, a PhD from University of Delhi and currently a fellow at Prime Minister's Museum and Library. My question is very simple, actually. What is the future of BRI in South Asia? I mean, I remember it was maybe either this year or last year, our Foreign Minister Jaishankar, he was at the Munich Security Conference. And at the audience, after his address, there was Bangladesh's Foreign Minister. So he raised a very pertinent question. So Bangladesh as a country, or let's say any such country, requires a lot of money and hard infrastructure projects. And there is a country like China which is ready to offer us all of that. He asked, how do we refuse that? In reply, Jaishankar said, you have to look at the track record, look at what's happening in Sri Lanka or maybe some countries in Africa. So my question is, are the South Asian countries actually learning from the lessons or the episodes of financial crisis they are seeing as case studies, or what does actually the future behold in terms of BRI in South Asia? And my question can be taken by any of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you for the insightful discussion. I am Trisha Kumar. I'm a youth delegate to the United Nations as part of the Global Coordination Team, and I'm also a co-founder of the Institute of Climate Policy Solutions, which was launched at COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh, alongside pursuing my undergraduate Geopolitical Science in Delhi University. My question is twofold. It was sort of related to the question the person asked before. How does the economic crisis in China, and specifically the real estate crisis in China, will impact the BRI and the future of BRI, because it is closely linked to the infrastructure industry? And the second part is, what would be the future of BRI given the different challenges and the discrepancies in its implementation? Would it collapse, or would it transform into a more soft power-driven initiative? Thank you.
Thank you. This is the question I always ask to our government officials, why they couldn't make it public. We have two projects, which has been, one project is much discussed at even ward level to central parliament, that is the MCC. And the narrative has been created, which is another part of the story, that if the Nepal has ratified, Nepal's parliament ratified this Millennium Compact program, this American army will be stations all over Nepal, which was all misinformation done. During that course, some of the MPs asked in parliament, we file a letter to the Information Commission, but they didn't reply us. Because this is not the first thing that whenever there is an agreement between China and China and Nepal, the agreement never make public. The very few agreements used to. like our trade ministry has done, but with the foreign ministry, it's a very difficult, that one. Once we get in the media, the same letter, MOU signed between Nepal and China, I went to then Foreign Secretary, today is the National Security Advisor. I asked that you sign on it. Is this the real? He said, yes, sir, this is the real one. And then I said, everybody is in hand now. Why don't you release at your website? And this is yet not released. And it's not only that one. When we recently have done a research on a small grants of India and a small grants from China. So we have asked different government ministries to give us the data. It was very hard to get it. All the data about the India, we have got it. But for China, they couldn't. And then from different sources, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Local Government. So we have got it. Very, very difficult to get. And this is not the framework agreement. Framework agreement yet not signed. I'm talking about the BRI MOU, which is signed in 2017. And the concept, the Nepalese people, Nepalese political leaders received that project as a game changer for Nepal. And they thought that the Chinese railway, Chinese roads in the 6 areas, hydroelectricity, everything. And Nepal has never thought that there are other components in the BRI. Nepal always thinking it is a grants and it is a for the infrastructure. Infrastructure gap is much discussed in Nepal since 10 years, I can say, because that our infrastructure gap is huge. We need 5.5 billion per year for almost 12 years to meet all the infrastructure gap. And since the terrain, the mountain, Himalayas, so it's very difficult for people, for transportation and many things. So that's why this is a hunger of infrastructure in Nepalese society. But now when they realize that it's not a grants, it's a loan, Nepalese thought that it's a grants. And the Chinese will build it, as they did in the past. In the 70s and 80s, they did several projects, the grants, several factory industries, roads, and many things they did. Same with the Soviet Union. India is always, the major infrastructure partner of Nepal. But this they thought, and I don't know why they are not ready to release it. But everybody knows what is written there. And I spoke to the several ministers personally, and they said, yes, you are right, but look, this is very difficult. Why to angry Chinese and all that. And recently there is one incident, just to mention, Professor Pant, if you allow me for 1 minute. So one important thing that just 3-4 months back, Chinese investor said that the Pokhara International Airport, which is an Exim Bank loan from China at 2% interest for 15 years, he declared that the Pokhara Airport is a BRI project. So the question arises in parliament, question arises in civil society and everywhere political party. So our foreign minister replied to the parliament and said that this is not BRI project. No BRI project is yet implemented in Nepal. So then the Chinese understanding of BRI of Chinese and Nepalese is different one. Our understanding is the only the infrastructure. Chinese understood there are a lot of clauses there, people-to-people relation. Yesterday also Chinese investor said, the progress is going on BRI. But he was talking about the visits of the Communist Party leaders, visit of the ministers, we have visits of our bureaucrats and all. And we are talking about the infrastructure. So understanding itself is a very different one. So, and then there is one very important thing that the many documents signing with the China is never released by Nepalese government. Thank you.
A lot of opacity there. Ambassador, I think there were two very similar questions about the future of BRI. I wonder if you want to speculate a bit and give it a go as to where do you think this is going, and how do you think whether it is more about China adapting to the backlash, or the countries adapting to perhaps what the Chinese are able to provide at the moment.
Because there is financial constraint on China, let's face it. And BRI has seen a lot of setback after COVID because, Bhagya mentioned about labor. It is true that for a lot of infrastructure projects, a lot of labor goes from China. So the labor could not go, projects got slowed down. And also there is not much technology transfer which ever happens in any of these projects. So, massive BRI projects like power plant or whatever, if there are 1,000 people employed, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 will come from China. Only the lowest level of labor will be local labor. So I think countries are much wiser. They have learned, and part of the answer has been given by Ambassador Vijay Karna when he, he's really explained very well where Nepal stands with respect to BRI, and he's clarified a lot of things which, in fact, I was not aware of. So, you've seen that at 2.2 or 2.3% interest rate, with payment starting in about 15 to 20 years, I mean, that's really very tough loan conditions. Those are very tough loan conditions. ADB is 30 years, and so for many countries, but the main problem for South Asia will be there is an infrastructure gap. Who's going to fill that gap? That gap has to be filled up. Western countries have come up with all kinds of, there is a G7 initiative, PGII, which is the Partnership for Global Infrastructure. Then Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is really, there has not been really fleshed out, at least as far as infrastructure investment is concerned. What is that thinking has to be done, that gap has to be filled. India does what it does as per its own priorities, as well as the priority of the partner country. And here again, there are projects running in Nepal, in Bangladesh, there are projects in Myanmar, there are projects in Sri Lanka, there are projects in most of Bangladesh projects are connecting Bangladesh to our northeast, which we really need. So that gap will be filled to some extent, but I think time will tell how this will proceed. But I definitely feel that the green technology bit is going to probably come in now, more of the softer part of BRI, and a little bit of rethink on the big, massive infrastructure project. But again, the million-dollar question will be that, South Asian countries do need money for this infrastructure upgradation. We all know that South Asia is the least integrated, sub-region in the world. Only 5% of our our trade is only 5% in the region. So, there is a long way for us to go as far as regional integration is concerned.
You can address this issue of, I think it was mentioned, the real estate crisis and its impact on BRI, but I think you can broaden it out and say the economic crisis in China and its impact on BRI. Some of it we have talked about, but briefly, if you can address that.
Yeah, very briefly, I think one thing is we have to realize that China is extremely aware of the kind of, this entire profligacy, financial profligacy, and its, its backlash can be. So in March, at the two sessions, that's when the Chinese parliament sits in session. There were not one but two. There was an entire plan to reject the state. So two party commissions which will specifically report to Xi Jinping were constituted. Now there's very little data available as to what they will do, but it shows that China is extremely exercised about the kind of debt and getting more bang for its buck. So that is definitely there. I think we'll have to look at towards the end of this month, you will have the BRI conference that happens in China, and we'll have to go through the debates, specifically what how Xi Jinping now conceptualizes it in future, to see the kind of shape it takes. And my last point is just coming off from where Ambassador Das left, is the entire soft power potential of BRI. So that is also on the minds of Chinese academics. And look at specifically how Huawei has done this very quiet reemergence in Southeast Asia. So Huawei took a lot of backlash in the US and in the West regarding other aspects, typically surveillance and all that. But look at Huawei. It's building hospitals in places like Thailand, Indonesia. So that soft work and that soft, utilizing the soft power is underway. So that's my.
Questions. We are completely running out of time. I'll give you one more round, last round. If you can very, very briefly, quickly, if you can ask your questions.
First of all, I would like to thank the whole ORF team for organizing this wonderful session. I'm Deepak Kumar Sharma, a first-year student at University of Delhi. And my question is to Bhagya Senaratne ma'am regarding the military use of BRI by China. A few months back, there was a controversy regarding a Chinese vessel called UN Wang 5 docking in the Sri Lankan port of Hanambantota. And it was accused of keeping surveillance on Indian missile sites. I want to ask, what is the local opinion in Sri Lanka regarding this military use of Sri Lankan ports by China? And do you think China could further leverage its BRI project to enhance its navy's capabilities? Thank you.
Okay, so I have one here, and two at the back. Okay, very, very, very briefly, quickly.
My name is Sudhanshu. I have a question to Riva ma'am. First question is IMEC going to compete with BRI? Like it is a counter for the BRI or not? And the second is like you have mentioned earlier about we are using our soft power as a countering other policies. So like you talked about the Bollywood. Can we use Bollywood as like expanding our foreign policy to foreign countries or setting our agenda out there? Thank you.
So basically, can the Indian state use Bollywood to project? Yes, go ahead. You can use this one.
Thank you, ma'am. For my name is Nitin, and my question, I'm a little bit confused about the answer by the ambassador, ma'am. Like ma'am said, the government cannot go for the soft power. So, like the China always use two types of power: non-material power and material power. So, economic footprint is equal to the security footprint. What they are going to do, like they invest $69.9 billion, Indonesia, Philippines 31.5, Vietnam 35.6, and one there is Survey Institute of South Asian Studies. Like Brunei, Indonesia, and Malaysia, they will prefer China over US if they will have a partner. So they are using their soft power and they are making their regional dominance over there. And India is not doing that. So if government will not go for soft power and we are using Bollywood, Bollywood is not making a narrative in the power game. It is just entertainment. So like that is my question. That is a little bit confused. Why the government is not using that? Like if we do not have.
I think there are two questions here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ayushi. I'm pursuing my master's in international relations. Talking about BRI in South Asia, the recent Maldives party, which has won in Maldives, is seen closer to China. And we are expecting more investments by China in Maldives. So how is India going to approach that? If our approach to Maldives is going to be different, and if yes, how?
My name is Adhyatmi here, and I'm an independent journalist and a photographer documentarian. I wanted to ask a question about the BRI project and the alternative project that has been framed out, which Das ma'am just quoted for IMEC project. Is the Bangladesh and the Sri Lanka, especially Sri Lanka, because it's a very closer geographical location, is also looking forward to cooperate in the sector so that as an alternative to BRI, what the Sri Lanka has faced in the past.
Okay, so what I'll ask all of my panelists if they can collect their thoughts, and so this will be their last comments as well. So if you can have concluding remarks as well as answers to any questions that you feel like have been addressed to you. So, so I'll start with Ambassador Karn.
Thank you. Actually, what I see that since 6 years, this all Big Bang and all euphoria has been settled at the moment. And as I said earlier, that the Nepal, very hard to negotiate with the China. And I found that when I talked to the Foreign Ministry and Finance Ministry official, even in Planning Commission, Vice Chairman was involved in this time negotiation. Everybody was very hopeful of negotiation on project implementation agreement. But yesterday, our Prime Minister, he said that he is not comfortable of the financing modalities. So what I said that it is the closure of the BRI project in Nepal. If the Chinese, I don't think that because since 2 years, we have been asking to change their conditionalities, but yet not. They are even not. And the second thing that look, earlier we have a participation in BRI forum by our president. The 2 times the president of Nepal participated. But this time, as my understanding is whether our energy minister or infrastructure minister is going to participate. So in Nepal's case, BRI, maybe they have another software program, the Silk Roadster, many things they come up. But for infrastructure and any loan is not possible. Second thing is a big project is the railway project, which cost is 3.5 billion, almost 25% of the national annual budget, and almost 10 to 15% of the total GDP. So Nepal is, and then what to export to China. There was a reason of that project, which was a must talked in Nepal, most impressive project it was done, that the India will use that railway from Raxaul to Kathmandu, and from Kerung to Kathmandu, the railway arrived. May India use for their transit for their goods and all. But I don't think at the moment any interest of India in this three countries project. So the railway, which is earlier was done, there are 3 questions arises. One is the financing model, then feasibility of the railway, and third is that environmental and the geological question arises of the coming from Himalaya to the bringing the rail, and then the capacity of Nepal to manage that railway. So that what I found that all these projects are in future not going to be implemented in Nepal. That's all from my part. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Over to you, Bhagya.
Okay, so several things. About the agreements, we were talking about agreements. I think personally, I feel this is the case in Sri Lanka as well. Most of the MOUs or agreements that Sri Lanka signs with China are not available to the public. I wonder if this is because in China, they do not publicize, they do not make documents and a lot of communication public because of their internal politics, and whether that is translating into the external environment. And I think that's something we can discuss or think about. Secondly, Ambassador Karna was talking about domestic grants and grants over loans from China, how the Nepali public or the politicians are calling for that. I wish that kind of thing was visible in Sri Lanka, but unfortunately, we have not made that kind of conversation in Sri Lanka. And this is interesting because we see one South Asian country, and even Bangladesh for that matter, talking about projects that are viable, that are extremely important for their people, compared to Sri Lanka, where some projects perhaps benefit the constituencies of certain politicians. So this disconnect between the politicians of different countries within our own region is, I think, interesting for us to see. And as Ambassador Das mentioned, I think South Asia is the least connected, and this is something I've spoken about a couple of years ago. And I think perhaps even India could take a role in facilitating greater connectivity within the region, and that way we don't have to look at extra regional entities or stakeholders to kind of facilitate connectivity. Someone was talking about military presence. In fact, there's been, I think, 25 survey and research vessels from China starting from February 2017. There are several reasons as to why this could be. One is the fact that there is no terrorist movement in our Sri Lankan waters. And secondly, it could also be, as some people say, the Chinese presence, that the Chinese are pressurizing Sri Lanka to coming and searching the environment here. And someone was recently talking to me about how the Chinese are having these so-called research programs, and they're also facilitating research. But in the end, what they're doing is coming and surveying the Sri Lankan seabed. I haven't done much digging into this, but seeing that there are all these vessels coming in all of a sudden, I think that's something to wonder. But again, I go back to saying whether it's all of a sudden or whether it's because there is no terrorist movement in our waters that's made it possible for these vessels to come in. We were talking about the future of the BRI. This is interesting because, again, China would definitely want to secure this program. This is Xi Jinping's baby, so to say. And China would, President Xi would not want this to kind of go down the drain because it would affect his own personal image, not just that of the country. So I think, like one of the speakers mentioned, this October's conference and deliberations around the 10th anniversary of the BRI would be an ideal location for us to see how President Xi is going to place the Belt and Road Initiative, which is his baby, and how he's going to project it to the future, and in what ways will he do that. So I think this is something we can look at, and there's continued conversations into the future.
Ambassador, so any final comments, any of the questions you want to pick up on?
There were a lot of questions on soft power, so I see it's already way beyond our time. So I don't think we can have a very extensive discussion on soft power. What I meant is that, see, soft power is leveraged by governments. Okay, government cannot start producing soft power, which means government can't produce good singers, good literature, things like that. Your soft power is a combination of a whole lot of things: your economic growth, your political system, how you people behave, what's your culture, what's your food like, what's fashion like, everything. So the whole thing is packaged together as soft power, and every government tries to leverage that soft power. To do what? To enhance its global image. Okay, so you are basically enhancing your global image so that your action globally is liked by the others. Okay, so this is really, in a very theoretical way, what the whole soft power business is. So in the case of India, we don't have to make much effort. Our basket of soft power is so huge. There are a lot of countries which struggle. Take another country like France, full of soft power. Everybody knows about French cuisine, French food, the language. Why do you want to learn that French language? There's so many people abroad who want to learn Hindi. Why? Because of the image, because of the very powerful soft power we have. So soft power is very important, but of course it cannot ever replace hard power. I mean, that goes without saying. So I didn't get your question, Sudhanshu, about alternative to... See, it's still very new, and I think, it's still very new. actually the announcement has just been made, and I think everybody in this region and those who are impacted by it would see it as a very positive development and would like to see it, implemented very fast. But the thing which sometimes get ignored is also what's happening to our east, the India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway. Even though it's moving slowly, even in the middle of the problems in Myanmar, it has moved. The Bangladesh has already said they want to also join. There is a proposal for an eastward extension of that highway up to Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. There is a BIMSTEC master plan on connectivity. So as far as connectivity is concerned, actually what is happening on the ground on the eastern front is very much, it's actually physically visible, and with the multiple railway lines, etc. I think it's something which is not theoretical, which is not out there, which will happen in a couple of years. It's already happening. So I think these are the... On Maldives, I just want to say, the relation between countries is a combination of many factors and many strands. So, it doesn't happen overnight, nor does a change of regime change the relationship completely. Democracies have change of government and diplomacy continues. So...
of saying it, India lost, China gains, and China gains, India, vice versa. I don't think that's how interstate relations work. But Kalpit, any last comments? Anything that? Okay. So thank you, everyone. Let me particularly thank Ambassador Karna and Bhagya Senaratne for joining us from afar. Thank you, Ambassador Ganguly Das. Thank you, Kalpit. And thank you all for joining for this very interesting conversation. But please do track BRI and the forum later this month. And then I think we can have another conversation on what happened there and how the Chinese have probably changed their track, or there is a shift in the way they are approaching this whole debate and all the issues that we have talked about today. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please join us for tea, those who are here. Ambassador Karn, Bhagya, I'm sorry I can't offer you tea. But all our good wishes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.